You follow the narrow path as it curves between the final huts of the village, and almost immediately the ground becomes even softer beneath your boots. This is the main lane leading outward, and every cartwheel, animal hoof, and pair of human feet has spent centuries pressing the soil into a thick, stubborn layer of mud. In dry weather, it hardens like uneven clay. In damp weather, like today, it becomes a slow, sticky obstacle course. Your boot lifts with a soft squelch. Medieval roads were rarely paved outside major towns. Most were simple dirt tracks formed gradually by use. Some Roman roads still existed in parts of Europe, but by the High Middle Ages many had crumbled or were reserved for larger trade routes. Village lanes like this one were much more organic. A pig wanders casually across the path ahead of you, snout buried in the ground as it searches for something interesting to eat. Pigs were incredibly common in medieval villages, partly because they were excellent at finding food on their own. Acorns, scraps, roots, whatever they could sniff out. In fact, pigs were sometimes released into nearby forests to forage freely, returning later when their owners called them home. It was a surprisingly efficient system. The pig snorts once in your direction and continues its slow inspection of the mud. You step around it and keep walking. To your left, a cluster of chickens scratches furiously at the ground, kicking tiny sprays of dirt behind them. Chickens were one of the most practical animals a medieval household could keep. They required little space, produced eggs regularly, and occasionally became dinner. And eggs were valuable. Protein was harder to come by for many peasants. Meat appeared only occasionally in most diets, often during festivals, special meals, or when an animal could no longer work. You reach the center of the village where the well stands. A few villagers have gathered here already. A young boy struggles with the wooden crank, lowering a bucket slowly into the dark circle below, while his older sister supervises with the seriousness of someone who has been placed temporarily in charge. The well is one of the most important features of the entire settlement. Clean water is never something you can take for granted in the medieval world. Most villages depended on wells, streams, or springs for their daily supply. And while some sources were clear and fresh, others could easily become contaminated by nearby waste or runoff from animals. That's part of the reason weak ale was so common at meals. Boiling during brewing reduced many dangers that invisible bacteria, though unknown to medieval people, could carry. You pause near the well long enough to watch the bucket rise from the darkness. The boy strains against the crank. The bucket finally appears over the stone rim, sloshing slightly as clear water drips down its wooden sides. A small victory. Water hauling is daily work in every household. Buckets are carried to homes, to cooking fires, to animals waiting impatiently in small pens. Nothing in the village runs without water. A woman beside the well lifts her own filled bucket carefully, balancing it with practiced ease as she begins walking back toward the houses. You give a small nod as you pass. Medieval villages were close communities. Everyone recognized each other, shared work seasons, celebrated the same holidays, and endured the same hardships. Privacy was rare, so was anonymity. As you leave the well behind and continue toward the edge of the settlement, the air begins to change slightly. The smoky smell of hearth fires fades, replaced by the rich scent of damp soil and growing plants. Fields spread outward ahead of you now, wide, open, and waiting. These lands are organized in long strips, narrow bands of farmland assigned to different families. This arrangement was part of the open field system used in many parts of medieval Europe. Instead of each farmer owning one neat square of land, villagers worked scattered strips across several fields. That way, if one area had poor soil or suffered bad weather, no single family would lose everything. Mainstream historical records show this system was surprisingly resilient. But it also meant cooperation was essential. Everyone planted and harvested around roughly the same time. Everyone followed the same rotation schedules for crops like wheat, barley, or legumes. You step off the muddy road and onto the firmer edge of a field. The soil here has been turned recently. Long furrows stretch into the distance, their dark lines catching the morning sunlight. In the far corner, two oxen move slowly while a farmer guides a heavy wooden plow behind them. The animals lean forward with steady strength, muscles shifting beneath their thick hides. Oxen were the tractors of the medieval world. Stronger and more patient than horses when pulling heavy plows, they could break tough soil that smaller tools simply couldn't handle. Historians still argue whether the heavy plow was one of the quiet technological revolutions of the Middle Ages. In regions with dense clay soil,
It allowed farmers to cultivate land that earlier generations struggled to use. You walk along the edge of your assigned strip, scanning the ground carefully. Work here will involve weeding, repairing small drainage channels, and checking the young plants pushing cautiously through the soil. It's slow, repetitive work, but it matters, because the hardest months from now will determine whether your household eats comfortably through winter or struggles through cold nights with empty cupboards. You kneel and run your fingers lightly across the soil. Cool, moist, promising. A small green shoot trembles in the breeze beside your hand. Life pushing upward through dirt. That simple miracle repeats across thousands of acres of farmland throughout medieval Europe every year. Entire communities depend on these fragile plants, surviving storms, droughts, insects, and the unpredictable moods of nature. And nature is not always cooperative. A distant crow caws loudly from the branch of a lone tree near the field. You glance up briefly, then return your attention to the earth. The day's work has officially begun, and it will continue for many long hours.
You step carefully between the narrow rows of soil, boots sinking just slightly with each step. The earth is soft from recent rain, which is good for crops, but less kind to anyone walking across it. Your strip of land isn't large by modern farming standards, but it stretches farther than it first appears. The medieval open field system creates long, thin bands of farmland that seem to run endlessly toward the horizon. You squat beside a small cluster of young plants and brush aside a few stubborn weeds. The work is simple. Pull, toss, move forward. Pull, toss, move forward. There's a quiet rhythm to it. Above you, the sun climbs slowly through a pale morning sky. The air still tarries a chill, but the steady movement warms your arms and shoulders soon enough. In the next strip over, a farmer guides 2 oxen through thick soil. The heavy plow behind them cuts deep into the ground, turning dark earth into long, curling ridges. The animals move slowly, but with enormous strength. Oxen were essential for medieval agriculture. A single team could pull a heavy plow capable of breaking the dense soils found in northern Europe. Without them, farming certain regions would have been nearly impossible. The farmer calls out softly to guide them. A gentle tug on the reins, a few quiet words. The oxen respond with patient obedience, stepping forward one slow stride at a time. It's hard work, but strangely peaceful to watch. You stand again and stretch your back. Even simple tasks like weeding become tiring when repeated for hours. Medieval labor wasn't always dramatic or exciting. It was mostly steady, repetitive effort that slowly shaped the land. Historians often describe peasant workdays as long, but seasonal. Certain times of the year, like planting and harvest, demanded intense labor from sunrise to sunset. Other periods were quieter, allowing time for repairs, tool making, or tending animals. Right now, the village is firmly in the busy season. You move a few steps farther along your strip and kneel again, pulling another handful of weeds. Insects buzz softly above the soil. Somewhere nearby, a lark sings from high in the sky, its tiny voice drifting down like scattered notes of music. Moments like this almost make the work feel pleasant. Almost. Then a small stone digs sharply into your knee, reminding you that comfort was never part of the medieval job description. You shift position and continue working. From time to time, other villagers pass along the narrow walking paths between the strips. Some carry tools over their shoulders. Others lead animals or push small carts filled with seed or bundles of hay. Everyone has something to do. The feudal system quietly shapes all of it. Under this arrangement, most peasants farm land technically owned by a local lord. In return for the right to live and work there, they owe certain obligations, labor days, taxes in crops, or other services. Mainstream historical documents from medieval Europe describe these agreements in great detail. On specific days, peasants worked directly on the lord's land rather than their own. These fields, called the domain, helped support the manor household. Historians still argue whether this system was deeply oppressive everywhere, or if some villages experienced it as a relatively stable partnership. Like many parts of history, the truth likely changed from place to place. But from your point of view today, the important fact is simple. The land must be worked, because the land feeds everyone. A shadow passes overhead. You glance up just in time to see a hawk gliding silently across the sky, wings stretched wide as it searches the fields below. Small animals freeze instinctively when the bird passes. A mouse darts quickly into a clump of grass. Nature, like medieval society, has its own hierarchy. You wipe dirt from your hands and look toward the distant edge of the fields. A cluster of villagers gathers there briefly, their voices drifting across the open land. Someone is laughing. Someone else is arguing about something you can't quite hear. Even in quiet agricultural work, human conversation finds a way to appear. You return to your task, slowly clearing another row of weeds. The sun climbs higher now, warming the air enough that you loosen your cloak slightly. Beneath it, your linen shirt begins to cling again as sweat forms along your back. Medieval farmers didn't have moisture-wicking fabrics or breathable athletic gear, just layers of wool and linen doing their best. You step carefully between the narrow rows of soil, boots sinking just slightly with each step. The earth is soft from recent rain, which is good for crops but less kind to anyone walking across it. Your strip of land isn't large by modern farming standards, but it stretches farther than it first appears. The medieval open field system creates long, thin bands of farmland that seem to run endlessly toward the horizon. You squat beside a small cluster of young plants and brush aside a few stubborn weeds. The work is simple. Pull, toss, move forward. Pull, toss, move forward. There's a quiet rhythm to it. Above you, the sun climbs slowly through a pale morning sky. The air still tarries a chill, but the steady movement warms your arms and shoulders soon enough. In the next strip over, a farmer guides 2 oxen through thick soil. The heavy plow behind them cuts deep into the ground, turning dark earth into long, curling ridges. The animals move slowly, but with enormous strength. Oxen were essential for medieval agriculture. A single team could pull a heavy plow capable of breaking the dense soils found in northern Europe. Without them, farming certain regions would have been nearly impossible. The farmer calls out softly to guide them. A gentle tug on the reins, a few quiet words. The oxen respond with patient obedience, stepping forward one slow stride at a time. It's hard work, but strangely peaceful to watch. You stand again and stretch your back. Even simple tasks like weeding become tiring when repeated for hours. Medieval labor wasn't always dramatic or exciting. It was mostly steady, repetitive effort that slowly shaped the land. Historians often describe peasant workdays as long, but seasonal. Certain times of the year, like planting and harvest, demanded intense labor from sunrise to sunset. Other periods were quieter, allowing time for repairs, tool making, or tending animals. Right now, the village is firmly in the busy season. You move a few steps farther along your strip and kneel again, pulling another handful of weeds. Insects buzz softly above the soil. Somewhere nearby, a lark sings from high in the sky, its tiny voice drifting down like scattered notes of music. Moments like this almost make the work feel pleasant. Almost. Then a small stone digs sharply into your knee, reminding you that comfort was never part of the medieval job description. You shift position and continue working. From time to time, other villagers pass along the narrow walking paths between the strips. Some carry tools over their shoulders. Others lead animals or push small carts filled with seed or bundles of hay. Everyone has something to do. The feudal system quietly shapes all of it. Under this arrangement, most peasants farm land technically owned by a local lord. In return for the right to live and work there, they owe certain obligations, labor days, taxes in crops, or other services. Mainstream historical documents from medieval Europe describe these agreements in great detail. On specific days, peasants worked directly on the lord's land rather than their own. These fields, called the domain, helped support the manor household. Historians still argue whether this system was deeply oppressive everywhere, or if some villages experienced it as a relatively stable partnership. Like many parts of history,
after a few hours in the fields, your throat begins to feel dry. Not dramatically dry at first, just that slow, creeping reminder that you've been bending, pulling weeds and walking through damp soil since sunrise. Your tongue sticks slightly to the roof of your mouth, and the warm air no longer feels as refreshing as it did earlier. Water, suddenly, becomes a very interesting idea. You straighten your back and glance toward the far end of the field, where a narrow footpath leads toward a small stream that winds through the countryside beyond the village. That stream is one of several water sources people rely on throughout the day. Wells provide the main household supply, but streams, ponds, and small springs also serve as convenient places to drink, rinse tools, or splash water onto a dusty face. You walk slowly toward it, brushing loose soil from your hands as you go. The path curves gently through tall grass that sways in the breeze. Grasshoppers leap out of the way of your boots, vanishing into the green like tiny spring-loaded acrobats. By the time you reach the stream, the sound of moving water is already clear. A quiet, steady trickle. Not a roaring river, just a modest ribbon of clear water sliding over stones, polished smooth by centuries of pleasant flow. You crouch beside it. The water looks clean enough. Sunlight glints on its surface, and tiny fish dart quickly beneath the ripples whenever your shadow passes overhead. Still, you hesitate for a moment. Medieval people understood, at least in a practical sense, that not all water was safe. They didn't know about microscopic organisms or bacteria, but they did recognize that certain water sources could make people sick. Streams passing through villages sometimes carried waste from animals or runoff from nearby fields. Historians still argue whether people were fully aware of these dangers or simply relied on experience and observation. A clear spring on a hillside might be trusted more than a slow pond near livestock. You dip your hands into the stream. Cold,
very cold. The chill travels up your wrists instantly, waking your senses far better than any cup of coffee ever could. You splash a little onto your face, wiping away dust and sweat. It's refreshing in a way that makes you sigh quietly. Nearby, another villager approaches with a wooden bucket. He nods politely and kneels on the opposite bank, dipping the bucket carefully beneath the water's surface. When he lifts it again, droplets slide down the curved wood like tiny glass beads. Buckets like this carry water back to fields, animals, and sometimes homes when the well becomes too crowded. You lean forward and scoop a handful of water to drink. The taste is crisp and slightly earthy, not unpleasant, just natural. Streams like this often served multiple purposes. People washed vegetables here, rinsed muddy tools, or watered animals. In some cases, they even washed clothes, though that job usually happened a little farther downstream, where the splashing wouldn't disturb drinking water. Laundry days in medieval villages could be surprisingly social events. Groups of women often gathered near water sources, scrubbing cloth against smooth stones while exchanging news, gossip, and the occasional complaint about stubborn stains. Soap, when available, might be rubbed into the fabric first. Early medieval soap was often made from animal fat combined with wood ash, an effective but somewhat rough mixture. Your hands, still damp from the stream, carry the faint scent of soil and fresh water. You shake them dry and glance along the banks. Reeds sway in the breeze. A dragonfly skims across the surface, its wings catching sunlight like tiny mirrors. Nature continues its quiet work without much concern for human schedules. A few paces upstream, a pair of children crouch beside the water's edge, attempting to catch something with a small woven basket. Fish, perhaps, or maybe frogs. Medieval diets often included whatever could be caught locally. Fish from streams, eels from ponds, even snails in some regions. Nothing wasted, everything useful. You stand again, stretching your arms overhead. The movement pulls your shoulders tight for a moment before the muscles loosen again. The break has helped. Your throat no longer feels dry, and the cool water on your face makes the afternoon seem slightly more manageable. But as you turn back toward the fields, a thought drifts through your mind. Water might refresh you now, but it can also carry dangers that medieval villagers don't fully understand. In fact, entire communities sometimes suffered illness after drinking from contaminated sources. Without knowledge of bacteria or sanitation systems, outbreaks could appear suddenly and spread quickly. Historians studying medieval health records often find descriptions of mysterious stomach illnesses, fevers, or waves of sickness that swept through towns without clear explanation. Clean water, in many ways, was one of the hidden luxuries of later centuries. You take one last look at the quiet stream before heading back toward the fields. The water continues its slow journey across the countryside, slipping between stones and reeds as if time itself moves at this same patient pace. Back in the fields, farmers are still working steadily. The oxen plod forward, tools scrape through soil, voices drift softly across the open land. Your short rest beside the stream already feels like a distant pause in the day's rhythm. Because medieval life doesn't stop for long. There's always more work waiting, and the sun still hangs high above the fields.
By the time you return from the stream, the sun has climbed noticeably higher. The chill of morning is gone now, replaced by a gentle warmth that settles across the open fields. It isn't the blazing heat of high summer, just a steady warmth that slowly draws sweat from your skin as you move. You kneel once more along your strip of land, pulling weeds and brushing loose soil away from the young plants. Your stomach begins to remind you that breakfast happened a long time ago. Medieval mornings start early, and food eaten at dawn rarely lasts forever. After hours of bending, lifting, and walking across uneven ground, your body quietly begins asking for more fuel. Not loudly, just persistent little signals, a soft growl here, a hollow feeling there. Across the field, a few other workers are beginning to pause as well. One man leans on the handle of his rake, while another sits briefly on a small wooden stool he brought from the village. Midday is approaching, and with it comes the next small reward of the day: lunch. Now, before your imagination begins picturing a cozy picnic basket or something resembling a modern lunch break, let's adjust expectations. Medieval midday meals were usually simple, very simple. You walk back toward the edge of the field, where a small cloth bundle rests beside a flat stone. You left it there earlier this morning when you arrived. Inside the cloth is your meal. You unfold it slowly. Another piece of bread waits there, slightly smaller than the loaf you had at breakfast, but just as dense. Alongside it sits a small wedge of cheese wrapped carefully in linen. Cheese was one of the most practical foods medieval farmers could produce. Milk from cows, goats, or sheep could spoil quickly, but turning it into cheese allowed it to last much longer. Hard cheeses especially could survive weeks or even months if stored properly. You take a bite of the bread first, still tough, still chewy, but after hours of labor, your stomach welcomes it with far more enthusiasm than it did earlier. You break a piece of cheese and place it on top. The flavor is strong, slightly salty, and surprisingly satisfying. Nearby, another group of villagers sits together on the grass, sharing their own midday meals. Someone passes around a small clay jug, probably containing ale or watered wine. A brief laugh drifts across the field. Medieval farming schedules don't leave much room for extended relaxation. The crops won't wait politely while everyone enjoys a long afternoon conversation. The soil needs attention. Weeds need pulling. Tools need swinging. You finish the last of your bread and wrap the empty cloth bundle again. Your stomach feels better now, full enough to continue, though not exactly satisfied in the luxurious sense modern meals sometimes provide. But that's normal. Medieval meals often focused more on sustaining energy than indulging taste. You rise from the stone and brush grass from your cloak. Around you, other villagers return to their strips of land, picking up tools and stepping carefully between rows of soil. The quiet rhythm of work resumes almost immediately. Pull, toss, step forward. Pull, toss, step forward. The sun continues its slow journey across the sky, and the long afternoon stretches ahead.
The afternoon light begins to soften as the sun slowly drifts westward. The fields glow with a warm golden color now, and long shadows stretch across the rows of crops like quiet fingers reaching toward the village. You straighten your back again, feeling the familiar ache settle into your shoulders. A day in the fields slowly works its way into every muscle, not with sudden pain, but with a steady heaviness that grows hour by hour. The soil beneath your boots feels slightly warmer now than it did this morning. The sun has spent the entire day pouring its energy into the ground, into the plants,
and into the farmers moving patiently between the rows. You brush dirt from your hands and glance toward the village in the distance. Thin threads of smoke still curl from the roofs of the huts. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent again. The world feels calmer now. Many farmers are finishing their last tasks of the afternoon. You pull one final weed from the soil and toss it aside. A small clump of earth sticks briefly to your fingers before falling away. Enough for today. Around you, other villagers begin gathering their tools. Wooden rakes rest across shoulders. Small baskets are lifted from the ground, and tired workers slowly begin making their way back along the same muddy paths they followed earlier this morning. You collect your cloak from the wooden stake and shake loose the dust that has settled on it. The air is cooler now. Evening is approaching. You walk back toward the narrow lane leading to the village. The path feels longer than it did this morning, mostly because your legs have spent the entire day walking, bending, kneeling, and standing again. But the sight of home, however humble, always gives a small boost of energy. As you approach the village edge, familiar sounds greet you. Chickens cluck loudly near a wooden fence. A goat bleats impatiently while someone fills a trough with water. Children run past in a blur of energy that only the young seem to possess after a full day. Village life is gathering again after hours spent scattered across the fields. You step carefully through the muddy lane between huts. The ground is more crowded now with footprints, wagon tracks, and the wandering trails of animals. One particularly ambitious pig has claimed a large puddle as its personal resting place. You walk around it. The pig barely acknowledges your existence. Inside your hut, the air feels cooler but familiar. The faint smell of smoke still lingers near the roof beams. The hearth sits quietly in the center of the room, waiting to be brought back to life for the evening meal. You kneel beside it and push aside the ashes. Beneath them, a faint red glow still survives. Perfect. You add small sticks first, then a thicker piece of wood. Soon the flame grows again, spreading warmth through the small space. Fire returns to its rightful place as the center of the home. Across medieval Europe, the hearth was more than a cooking spot. It was the heart of daily life, providing warmth, light, and a place where families gathered after long days of labor. Historians studying medieval homes often find that everything in the house seemed arranged around this central fire. You hang your cloak back on the wooden peg and sit briefly on the stool beside the table. The cat appears almost immediately. It hops lightly onto the bench beside you, clearly aware that evening often brings the possibility of food. Patience, you might say, if cats understood such negotiations. Outside, the sky slowly shifts from pale gold to deeper shades of orange. Sunset is approaching, and with it comes the final small routines of the day. As the fire strengthens, the hut fills with a gentle orange glow. The light flickers against the wooden walls, making shadows dance slowly across the beams above your head. After spending the entire day outside under open sky, the small room suddenly feels surprisingly cozy. You place a small iron pot over the fire. Dinner tonight will be simple. Most medieval meals were built around something called pottage,
a thick stew made by simmering whatever ingredients happened to be available. Vegetables, grains, herbs, maybe bits of meat if fortune allowed. Today's version begins with water and a handful of barley. You stir slowly as the grains begin to soften in the heat. A carrot joins the pot next, chopped into uneven pieces with the small knife hanging from your belt. Perhaps an onion, too, if one was saved from the last market day. The smell slowly fills the hut, warm, earthy, comforting in its own quiet way. Outside, the village grows quieter as darkness approaches. Without bright street lamps or glowing windows, medieval evenings arrive quickly. Once the sun disappears, the world becomes dim except for the soft glow of hearth fires inside homes. Candles exist, of course, but they are not used carelessly. Most common candles are made from tallow, animal fat, which burns with a faint smoky smell. Beeswax candles burn cleaner, but those are expensive and usually found in churches or wealthier households. So the fire becomes the primary source of evening light. You sit beside it, watching the stew bubble gently. The cat inches closer, slowly, very slowly. It is attempting what historians might call the ancient feline strategy of pretend to be invisible until food appears. You tear a small crust from the bread left earlier and toss it toward the floor. The cat wins again. Across the village, faint voices drift through the night air. People talk quietly outside their homes, sharing bits of news gathered throughout the day. Markets, weather, rumors from nearby towns. In the medieval world, information travels slowly but spreads eagerly once it arrives. Historians still argue how accurate many of these village stories were. Without newspapers or official announcements, word of mouth could transform a simple event into something much larger by the time it reached the next village. You taste the stew. It's ready. Not luxurious, but warm and filling. Exactly what a long day of labor demands.
After dinner, you step briefly outside the hut. The sky above the village has deepened into a rich blue, and the first stars are beginning to appear. Medieval people saw a night sky far brighter than most modern city dwellers ever experience. Without electric lights, the stars stretch across the heavens like a quiet river of silver. The air is cooler now. You breathe slowly, letting the calm settle around you. Some villagers still move between houses, finishing chores, or speaking softly near the well, but most are retreating indoors. Night in the medieval countryside is not a time for wandering. Darkness hides many things: uneven paths, wild animals, sometimes even thieves. Without lanterns or torches, walking beyond the village becomes surprisingly difficult. You glance toward the fields. They are invisible now, swallowed by shadow. But tomorrow morning they will return, waiting once again for hands to work the soil. The rhythm of life continues, day after day, season after season. Inside the hut, the fire has burned lower. You sit near it for a while, letting its last warmth relax your tired muscles. Your hands are rough from soil and work. Your boots sit beside the door, slowly drying from the damp earth of the fields. You rub your eyes. Sleep is approaching quickly. In medieval households, people often slept earlier than modern schedules allow. Without artificial lighting, there was little reason to stay awake deep into the night. Some historians even believe people practiced something called segmented sleep, waking briefly in the